Well, hi there, everybody. It's Bill Whittle in the Stratosphere Lounge and episode 65. Episode 65. By the way, before we go any further, you got to check out my awesome shirt here. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? I just love that. That is from my favorite guys out there in the whole world. I don't know if you've ever been to Ranger Up, but Ranger Up is fantastic. RangerUp.com. They have all kinds of really great T-shirts, and mostly a lot of the stuff is for ex-military guys. A lot of the stuff specifically for ex-military guys. But I figured the American flag kind of belongs to everybody, and this is one of those shirts. I've got a bunch of great stuff from them. They've got just my personal favorite is there's a it's that print. I don't know who the Renaissance artist is, but it's a print of the Archangel Michael with his sword, and he's got his boot on the neck of Satan. And it says the Latin, I forget what the Latin is, but it says, "I fear no evil." It's just terrific stuff. They got the best graphic designers I've ever seen over there at Ranger Up. So I don't get a kickback or anything, and we're going to be doing our own shirts soon. But as a person who appreciates good graphic design, I just thought I'd let you know they're just terrific, and it goes to a good cause too. It's good to be back. It's been an interesting week. Last week was tough. I have to tell you, somebody in the comment section just mentioned I look a little rested. Before I go any further, let me just say this. Those of you who watch the show either on YouTube or on Ustream afterwards, which is virtually all of you, is 3,000 or 4,000 people end up watching a Stratosphere Lounge episode. And right at this very second, we got 127 people watching live. I know the event moves around a little bit, and I'm going to try and get that a little more standardized going forward too. But I have to tell you, there's something special about seeing it live. There's something really fun about the interaction with the comment stream. So if you ever get a chance to check in live, we'd love to have you. Non-Mala Timbeo. Thank you, Aloe. Colson, I figured he'd know. See, that kind of thing, exactly. It's just a blast. It's really fun to interact with people, and it's fun to, to see the feedback in real time of what we're doing and how things are going. Brighten it up just a little bit. I got my awesome phone that controls the color temperature of the lights, which we never get exactly right. Everything's slowly starting to hum. We got this background color on the walls there, over there. That went from red to purple a couple shows ago, and it fixed the color balance on the face. Everything else is looking groovy. And as you well know by now, I'd rather look good than feel good. Yeah, it's been an interesting week. So let me just tell you a couple things before we get started on finishing up the Deep Thoughts three-part Stratosphere Lounge, because the questions have been so amazing. A couple things that have happened since we spoke last. Just two things. Three things, I guess. All of them are they're big for me. They probably won't mean much to you, but they're gigantic for me. So downstream, it'll mean something to you guys because it really affects the quality of the work. The first thing I have to say is that the Your Government DVD has been in the authoring house for about 5-6 days now. And the awesome thing about that is this particular place is so cool that you can check their website and find out where in the assembly line your project is. We ordered 2,000 of them, something like that, 2,500 maybe. The discs have been pressed, the covers have been printed. They're now at the stage where they are folding and gluing the jackets for the discs, but the discs are already off the machine. And so we should have them probably by Monday or Tuesday. Monday and Tuesday, we're going to pick them up in a truck, going to go to Beverly and pick them up. They're here in L.A., and we're going to unload 2,500 of them. And then I'm going to take out 850 or so and start autographing every single one of them for our long-suffering members who've been promised this disc since November. So the first thing that's really significantly different about me from the last time we talked is that DVD. We had a lot of problems with the compositing. Took a long time to get the compositing in. We had problems once it got here. We had problems getting everything sorted out. We had terrific audio mix work done by a great friend of mine named Sean. And then we sent them in, and we got them in there. And the next thing you know, we get the test disc back, and we got an encoding problem, and so on and so on. But let me just wrap this up by saying that DVD was a joy to do, and I think it's some of the best work I've ever done. It looks magnificent. It's absolutely terrific. And when you see all 11 parts, you really do get the sense that there's nothing out there that's magical about this. We could fix all of these problems. We could get the country back on the rails and have a free, happy, successful, growing, wonderful, secure country. It's actually very simple. And when you see all of these 11 episodes on taxes and spending and regulations and so on, it really is really cool. So I don't want to for a second sound like say anything negative about it, other than to say, because so many of those delays were out of my hands and then some of them were in my hands, it has been a 2-ton weight on my shoulders since November, and it's a weight that's gotten heavier every week. Every single week that went by, from middle to end of November until last week, it was just heavier and heavier and heavier, and more of a psychological burden on me, to the point where it was like I literally couldn't think about or do anything until that DVD. Is there anything that can move the DVD today? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, that's what we're going to do today. If not, then it's still floating out there. But a week ago Monday, we got it, or a week ago Friday, we got it out, a week ago today, got it out to the authoring house. And so on some level, that was off my plate then. But the other part of it is important. And that is that once we got the DVD master to the DVD house, and we'd seen the DVD sort of proof copy, it's like the galleys, and we'd gotten that test disc back, because it's what they're going to make all the discs are going to be. Once we got that disc back and checked it the second time and then didn't see any errors, once that was done, we were able to take that master file and upload it for our members. And I know many of you aren't members, and I'm not trying to sell you on the membership. I'm just telling you just psychologically this huge weight that's been on my shoulders. So once we did that and sent out the email blast, it was, on some level, it was delivered. A DVD format, we forget how primitive this is. The technology's moving so fast. A DVD format is, I think, 720 by 480, 720 pixels across by 480 tall. The form that we uploaded for streaming and that you can download if you're a member is 1920 by 1080. It's 4 times the resolution. It's just fabulous. But once that was up and available to members, it's going to sound odd to you, maybe not. You guys probably know me pretty well by then. Once the entire 11-part thing was online and the members could see it, in my head and in my heart, it was the first time since we opened the doors on this thing where I felt like, okay, you're not a fraud today. You know, today you're not a fraud. I never was a fraud, and I never was dragging my heels on it, but it was the first time there was the evidence that what I said I would deliver was there. It was only 6 months late, but there it was. So to get the DVDs into the authoring house, pick up the boxes on Monday or Tuesday, get them autographed and in the mail is enormous. Having it delivered to the members is enormous for me, enormous. Now I can start concentrating on other things. And the second thing that's been really big was last weekend, a week ago, was my last scheduled speaking appearance of the year. I'm sure more will come in, they usually do. But that was the last one that was scheduled. Last year, I went out, it seemed like every weekend I was out. I think between January and June or July of 2013, I was out of town every week with the exception of 2 or 3 weekends during that 6-7 month period. And I've been doing a lot of traveling this week. And the reason that's important is because, as I mentioned in that Facebook post, which so many of you were so kind on, it's a hard thing when your weekend consists of, okay, time to relax now, and relax means tomorrow morning you have to be up at 4:30 in the morning to be in your car at 5:30 so you can be at LAX at 6:30, standing in that security line for 40 minutes, get on a 7:30, 8 o'clock flight for 5 hours sitting the East Coast. And I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about my job, because of all the things I love doing in the world the most, I love speaking to people, and I love meeting people afterwards. My favorite thing in the world. So I absolutely adore that, but I don't much like the traveling. I always do that. I try to make a subtle little adjustment on the color, and it just goes out. That's what makes the show fun, isn't it? It's the worst produced show on the internet, so we silly thing. Yeah, blued it up. Yeah. But it's the travel, And LAX is not the worst airport in America, but you can certainly see it from there. So, you know, that's been a little hard too. Been a little been a little hard to start every weekend by getting in an airplane and flying someplace. So that's behind me. And I do have an assistant for those of you who are kind enough to offer, and we may take you up on that someday, but right now, I really appreciate it. So those two things are behind me and an enormous relief. And the final thing that's behind me, and is quite a bit of relief too, is, is my friend Reno, my poor cat, who was 21 years old, and I knew he didn't have a whole lot longer. And getting that behind me was kind of liberating too, although that wasn't really even on my radar until after it was over. I'll just say a few things about that just real quick, because I think there are bigger issues at stake other than, losing a pet that you've had for 21 years. First of all, for the exceedingly kind birthday wishes, for the exceedingly kind support when I was talking about how tired I was, and especially for the unbelievable outpouring of support and sympathy regarding my cat. Thank you very much. It means the world to me. The interaction with the people is far and away the best part of this job. This was an interesting case. My friend Dana had a bunch of cats, and we've probably together had to make that trip 6 or 7 times now. And it's never easy, ever. But every time, including the time I lost my other cat, Texas, back in 2010, in every one of those cases, the animal was dying. It was dying, it was on its way out. Some of those animals, Dana and I have been giving intravenous fluids to every day. For Dana, it was every day for 6 months to keep those cats hydrated and comfortable and happy. But in every one of those cases, they were literally on their way out. And Reno was a slightly different case, because Reno was just getting older and older and older. And up until about 10 days ago, he was just old and slow, but he was here. He'd come up on the couch. He'd try to mooch my dinner like he always does. He'd push all the other cats out of the way for the cat food. I have 2 other cats, like he always did. He'd come up sleep on the bed, and had little stairs, little pet stairs, so he could come up on the bed. He'd interact with me wherever I'd go, up until about 10 days ago. He was just old and slow, but here. His vision was mostly gone. His hearing was mostly gone. You'd come in at night, and you'd turn the light on, and he'd look around, and it's like, something's going on. He didn't know what, but you'd go up and scratch him behind the ear, and he'd start purring. He was happy as can be. So that was fine, and I was happy to have that continue for as long as it was going to. But I knew for the last year or two he's getting older. And then about 10 days ago, I came home. I couldn't find him. I just looked everywhere for him. I couldn't find him. He wasn't in any of his regular places, and he was actually sleeping in the litter box. And from that point forward, I think he might have had a stroke or something. Because from that point forward, he would just go around, and he would literally just walk in little circles and bump into walls, and didn't know where he was, and just fall asleep wherever we left him. He'd fall asleep in the litter box. Just something had happened to him. And so we spent, a final couple of good days with him, and then it was time to take him down there. And the reason I wanted to just bring this up very briefly is because I'm going to say something, and I understand how absurd this is. I'm going to tell you in advance that I understand how absurd this is. But what's awful about having to take a pet down to the vet, to have your pet put down, is the fact that you are the author of that action. It's your decision. It's not the cat's decision. It's not a group decision. It's your decision. And you decide. I remember 2 days ago, I made a phone call. I decided, you know what, this guy doesn't need to be cleaned up and washed because he's falling asleep in his own litter box. Doesn't need to be washed every day, wander around in circles, bump into walls, doesn't know where he is, doesn't know where I am or who I am. So I made a decision, and I scheduled him for the vet the next day, and that meant that night I knew was going to be his last night, and I knew the next morning was going to be his last morning, and I'm the author of this series of events. It's my decision. I caused it. Now, you can make all the justifications you want to, and there are plenty of good ones, and I know I did the right thing, and yet you say, is it time? All of the other pets I've taken down were checked out in their eyes. They were dying in front of me. He wasn't, but he he didn't recognize anything. He couldn't see anything. He would fall asleep wherever he laid down and wander in circles. And like I said, I'm justifying it to myself even now. But here's the part that I'm going to say that I know sounds ridiculous, but was an insight to me. Having just finished an afterburner about our soldiers and about the military and about the work that they do and the sacrifices they make, I am the author of that cat's demise, and I think it was an act of kindness. But I just want to say that for those of you who may be watching this, who have been leaders of men in combat, who've had to make decisions that sent other people, not animals, other people, young people, healthy people with their entire lives in front of them. Only when I was taking this cat down, because look, if the cat's dying, it's a no-brainer, right? If the cat is in distress and he's breathing hard, or that's a no-brainer. But when you make a decision to terminate a life that you care about, when I was doing that, I began to realize through the insignificance, the relative insignificance of what I was doing with a cat who's led a long and healthy life and is an animal. He's my friend, but he's still an animal. It just made me appreciate the monumental, soul-destroying weight that you magnificent people have to carry with you for the rest of your lives. To make a decision to send men who are friends of yours into a building or across the street or down a riverbank or to send them on a patrol. You make a decision, you send them out there, and they don't come back. I don't know how you deal with it other than to try to deal with it the way I deal with it on an infinitesimally smaller scale. I just keep justifying it to myself. I keep telling myself what the options are. I keep trying to explain it to myself. I keep asking what I would like to have done if it were me. But this time, for the first time, I began to have, again, a microscopic, an infinitesimal, a nano particle glimpse of what those few of you who've had to do that have had to go through. And my God, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything I can do to thank you for that burden. As it turns out, and this will be the end of this, and we'll get on with our questions. As it turns out, I had a very rough trip to Vegas 2 weeks ago. I don't particularly like Vegas. I always get the sense that all of the glamour and the glitz and all the stuff I see is somebody's college education or somebody's mortgage. I just have a hard time with Vegas. I'm totally in favor of Vegas. I don't have any problem with Vegas at all from a moral or intellectual point of view. To me, I just get a bad vibe when I'm there. So, I was in Vegas for a fundraiser for the Nevada Military Support Alliance, which raised money to provide a Fisher House for, I think, for Nellis Air Force Base, which is just north of Vegas. The Fisher House is a place where it houses anywhere from 8 to 16, 20, 30 families, and it's designed to provide a basically free apartment where families can stay with their wounded warriors for extended lengths of time, and they can all be together and help each other and support each other. And it's a great cause, and I was honored to be a part of it. But while I was there, I got a chance to meet a guy, real nice guy, just introduced himself as Pete. And I was at this cocktail party, and I was talking with Pete for a while. And he struck me as just a really decent man. He just struck me as a good man. I had no idea what Pete did, and I had no idea why he was there, but he struck me as just a nice guy at a cocktail party. One of those salt-of-the-earth kind of American people that you see with this kind of general kindness, but a kind of toughness, too. Well, it turns out that Pete was actually Peter Pace, General Peter Pace, U.S. Marine Corps, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I saw him at that cocktail party do something amazing, which I'll come back to. The next day at the event, I opened the event and said a few words, and then there was dinner served, and then afterwards General Pace got up. And he started talking about the men that he had led into combat in Vietnam and the loss of his men. And he started talking about the loss of his men, and I thought he was going to talk about the loss of his men the way that everybody else talks about the loss of their men. I lost some men, I feel bad, I lost some men. That's not what he did at all. He started talking about the loss of his men, and he started out by saying, the first man I lost was Master Sergeant David Osborne. That's not his name, obviously, but you get the idea. And David was a great guy, and David was this and this and this, and David did this, and I sent him on this mission, and I think it was at Hue in Vietnam, and he was killed by enemy gunfire. And the second man I lost was Tech Sergeant so and so forth. And he listed them by name. He listed them by name in order of the men under his direct command who had been killed as a result of his orders as a lieutenant. He's probably 20, 21, 22 years old in the United States Marine Corps in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. And I was as moved as I've ever been, and I was as proud as I've ever been to be a part of a country that has a military like that. I told the story before he got up about me getting involved and me doing this whole line of work as a result of my father making the snap decision. I don't know why he did it. I still don't know why he did it. To be interred at Arlington, and my sense of amazement that all the headstones were the same size, that we didn't have giant monuments to generals and then all the commoners, were buried in, mass trench or something. The fact that you could walk through the headstones, I've told the story several times, and it's on eject, eject, eject under honor on the right sidebar. It's the first of the Silent America essays. It's what got me started. How every single headstone is exactly the same size, and if you walk through Arlington, you'll see a headstone that'll say somebody's name, and it'll say Major General, and it will be World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm. And right next to him will be some kid who was born in 1991 and died in 2010. He was 19 years old, corporal, right next to him. That's astonishing that a country would treat its soldiers with that kind of respect. And when I told that story, by the way, not many people, some people knew it, some people didn't. But Arlington National Cemetery, just for those of you that don't know, is underneath a large house. And there's a beautiful house up on the hill, old Victorian house. It's all, Virginian house. And that house at Arlington National Cemetery belonged to Robert E. Lee. And Arlington National Cemetery is the most hallowed ground in America because during the Civil War, Robert E. Lee was offered command of the Union armies. It's famously known that he was offered command of all the Union armies, and he turned it down. He said, I cannot draw my sword against my country. His country was Virginia. His country was Virginia. So he turned down command of all the Union armies to go back and fight for Virginia. He was offered command of the Army of Northern Virginia and needless to say, performed legendary exploits there. But I forget which battle it was. It might have been Antietam. I actually don't remember. Maybe it was Fredericksburg, Eastern Theater battle. After the battle was over, the Union decided, as a way of getting back at Robert E. Lee for his decision to join the Confederacy, that they would take all of the war dead and bury them in his backyard. Arlington National Cemetery is Robert E. Lee's backyard. That house up on the hill at Arlington belongs to Robert E. Lee. They buried the corpses of the dead in the Civil War that they felt that he was leading in his backyard as punishment for him. So that was an interesting part of the night. And just as a quick aside before I close this story, I got up a little bit and told a little bit of my story of how I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I saw the Thunderbirds, who were based at Nellis, when I was 5 and was going to go to the Air Force Academy. Vision got a little soft, and I was standing in front of a room of 2,000 people, many of them vets. I've never seen so many dress uniforms in my life, a lot of them Air Force. And I looked out there, and from the previous night, the cocktail party and mingling prior to the event, I knew that there were a lot of guys who were either current F-15, F-16 fighter pilots or retired fighter pilots. And I got up in front of those guys and I said, I washed out of the Air Force Academy because of poor vision in my left eye, but I'm here to tell you if I hadn't, I would have shot down every single one of you sons of bitches. I would have shot down every one of you, would have beaten every single one of you in air-to-air combat. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. And there was a momentary pause and a bit of a laugh, and I said, and that kind of mental instability is what ended up getting me a job in the entertainment business. So, so that was General Pace, and he was very, very moving. But of all the things I've seen in my life with the military, I'll tell you the thing that was most moving to me happened the night before General Pace spoke. We were at this cocktail party. There was a soldier who had lost both of his legs, and I think at the hips, really, really major double amputee. And they'd built a special house for him the year before, and they brought him back to this event. And at this cocktail party, one of the guys who was a representative of the Las Vegas Boxing Commission brought out a giant championship belt, one of these gigantic, huge things that the champions wear, and gave it to General Pace, thanking him for all of his service to the country and so on, and also brought out large medals, big medals, that he put around some of the VIPs' necks. So he did that. And then they took a couple pictures, and then everybody kind of just sort of drifted away a little bit. And I don't know if anybody else was watching. I was watching. General Pace had this belt, this giant championship belt, and he walked over to where this soldier, who I don't know if he's ever met before, Army, double amputee, walked over to where the soldier was wearing the medal, and General Pace took that belt off around his shoulders and draped it over that guy's shoulders, gave him the belt, and then he did something I'll never forget. He reached over, and he kissed that guy on the head. Just very quietly, very quickly, just a kiss on the head, and walked away. And I thought to myself, as long as we have people like this, we're going to deserve what we get in terms of the goodness and the security that we get. We have leaders like this. We have this kind of humanity and this kind of connection to our soldiers on the part of the command structure. We'll be fine. And then the next week I went out and started talking to some other guys and found out that no, those days are rapidly coming to an end, and that's why I did the Disarming the Warriors Afterburner, which you can see on the Facebook page and on BillWhittle.com. It's quiet in the comments section. I'm worried if somebody's maybe there's a... Anyway, that's that. So that little adventure with my cat, who I miss a lot, and some of the sadness I feel for Reno being gone is not so much for the loss of the cat, who had never had a bad day in his life. He was just, I saw him the day he was born. I'd never had a cat before. I hated cats. I was a dog person my whole life. I thought cats were nasty, obnoxious animals. I didn't know why you keep them as pet. I thought they'd be about as useless as a reptile or as a fish. And my friend said, just keep one for the weekend, and he brought over the one that had crawled up my leg. He crawled up my leg, crawled up my arm, and sat on my head. Just did when he was a little tiny kitty. But I saw him the day they were born because I was over at his house when they had the litter. And he stayed with me for 21 years. And the reason that I felt a lot of sadness about it is because he was the last connection, really, that I have to a part of my life that was not any fun at all. Not any fun at all. There were several times during the course of Reno's life and Texas's life, probably 6 months at a stretch for a while, and then another 2 months for a stretch, where I had to put him in a cat carrier and send him down to Florida to live with my mom because I was staying in somebody's garage or a motel. I was staying in a $160 a week motel. And I was riding my bike to go and get some work and try and do, dig myself out of that hole, which I did. And he got to see all of that. He got to see me absolutely at my worst, and then got to see me at my best. Got to watch this whole eject thing. My dad never did. My dad was the impetus for this. His death and his interment in Arlington is really what got me started. But he never got to see any of it. Reno got to see it all. And I realized that obviously he's a cat. He doesn't know what it means. But it was the last real connection I have to really kind of dark and scary and lonely and desperate years. And obviously you can't be too upset about losing that. But at the same time, it's a milestone. It is. It's a milestone. It's a big part of my life that was gone. I was 34 when I got him, I guess, 33, 34. And So anyway, he never had a bad day. He was the healthiest cat, happiest cat. He was purring when he went. So we all hope we can go that way. And again, so there's not the slightest bit of misunderstanding here. Putting down a cat is not the same as sending men off to get killed, but it's close enough for me to have gotten some shadow on the wall of the cave reflection of what you incredible officers and people like Peter Pace do. And the fact that it matters and it hurts is why we deserve this freedom. Because when you talk about some of these other countries, it's just cannon fodder. The general's going to, go back to a chateau and have a lovely dinner and, over the top. Good luck. So, anyway, so much of that. Where are we? We actually are on the deep thoughts issue, chapter 3, and I'm still on page 1 of a 3-page question thing, and I'm already 40 minutes into the show, so this one's going to be a little longer, which suits me just fine because we weren't here before. I have to do one follow-up. I promised I would do this last time. I mentioned the last question I took before I ended the last show was from Zechariah Tiemens, who said, who's the most important, least known figure in history? And I did a lot on John Boyd, who I feel very strongly about. But there was another person I mentioned in passing, and I want to mention him briefly. I don't know nearly enough about him to be able to go into anything like that kind of detail, nor do I have time. But I think probably far more than Boyd, really, certainly more than Boyd. Without question, more than Boyd. I think the answer to this question is who's the most important, least known figure in history? I don't think there's only one answer. And that answer, honest to God, is Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug is the most important, least known person in history. Norman Borlaug is was an American, died just not too long ago, about a year ago, I guess. Was an American agronomist who basically on his own figured out a way to grow crops, modify crops, breed crops to require less fertilizer, to produce a much higher yield, to require less water. Norman Borlaug, by himself, through his own work, Norman Borlaug fed the world. There are billions of people who are alive today and living relatively comfortably because of Norman Borlaug. And as a matter of fact, I keep Norman Borlaug in my back pocket for when people really start coming down about America and about how bloodthirsty we are and militaristic we are and so on. First, I lay out the whole thing about, hey, we didn't start Korea, we didn't start Vietnam, we didn't start World War II, we didn't start World War I, we didn't start any of this stuff. We didn't start Gulf I, we didn't start Gulf II, we didn't start Iraq, we didn't start any of this stuff. And for those of you who think we did start Iraq, we didn't. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and paid the consequences of it several years later. So we didn't start any of this. We ended it, though. But for those of you who think America's all evil, the world population is up billions of people alive as a result of capitalism and Norman Borlaug, and down 200 million people as a result of communism and socialism. So you socialist, high-minded, moral, superior imbeciles have 200 million dead people on your plate. You shot them in the back of the head or starved them to death. And on the other side of the scale, we don't have 200 million people who are alive today. We have 2 billion or 3 billion or 4 billion people alive today, because of this American who worked so hard and so quietly and never, to my knowledge, certainly didn't strike me as having died rich or even particularly famous. So there's your answer, Mr. Tiemens, Z. Tiemens. Norman Borlaug goes with it in a cakewalk, in my opinion. Oh, he died much longer ago than I thought. I just found out from the comment sections from Ed Finn that he actually died in 2009. Seems like it was only just a year or two ago. Time flies, huh? Yeah, Norman Borlaug, American agronomist, fed the world, keeps feeding the world, is feeding the world every day. He'll feed the world as long as there is a world, as long as people are eating food. You can thank Norman Borlaug for that. So let's move on. This one's a little interesting, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's another one of the Tiemens questions. It's from Joshua Tiemens. He says, when looking into the truly horrifying conditions that have been present for most of the history of man, conditions that would be unthinkable here, the kind of conditions where for you and I, we question whether it's worth being alive. When looking at these things, how do you come to grips with the fact that you were spared all of that? How do you come to grips with the fact that not only were you spared, but also the fact that it was not bound to happen to some generation of humans? It was, in fact, extremely unlikely, the life we live now. But yet, here we are. We live like the gods on Mount Olympus compared to the natural state of things, even when compared with the rest of the world today. How do you come to grips with that? That's a profoundly good question, a deep question. To be perfectly honest with you, Joshua, if you just raised that question and made some pale answer to try and answer it on a yearly basis, we wouldn't be any trouble at all. All of our problems today are as a result of ingratitude and an absolute intentional blackout of information in terms of what life is like in history, what life is like in the world today, in the third world. I had a realization about this many years ago when I first started thinking about it. And I thought about the third world. I'd been to the third world. The guy who made it okay for me to be a conservative, P.J. O'Rourke, basically, was talking about in his book, his incredible book, Eat the Rich, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's probably the most influential book I've ever read. One of the top 3 or 4, anyway. He was talking about going through the Ukraine, I think he was. And he said you'd come to these villages in the Ukraine, and you would see these running sewers outside of people's houses, just running sewers, just human filth, right outside your door. And he said, as I recall, you can't blame this on race, you can't blame this on culture or anything. These people are as white as they get, they're as Caucasian as they can be, because there are the Caucasus Mountains. But he said, an American cannot look at this and not have a thought. And the thought was, for $200 in an hour at Home Depot, I could fix this and it would be fixed forever. It would not be a problem again. They'd have sanitation forever. $200 and an hour at Home Depot. So why doesn't it get done? It's never been done. It's always been done this way. Our fathers did it. It's been this way in every village. It's been this way in this village since the dawn of time. So, I had that thought, and I thought, what's wrong with these people? What's wrong with them? What's wrong with the people in Thailand? I went to Thailand. I thought the Thai people were as kind and as nice as they could possibly be. Absolutely lovely, warm people. The ones I met, I couldn't say enough about them. I thought they were grand. But it's a sewer, and there are open garbage dumps right next to expensive Western hotels. Why don't they do any maintenance? Why did the power cables hang down so that people's heads are brushing against them? Why are there no traffic signs? Why isn't anybody wearing helmets? Why? Why is life so cheap? Why are things so dirty? Why does nothing work? Why is it that if you take a cell phone or a satellite dish or a pickup truck or something, you drop it into this third world, that it stays there until it rots, and then once it's rotting, they can't fix it, and they certainly can't make new ones? Why? What's wrong with them? And that's when I had this thunderbolt, this just lightning flash right between the eyes. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. This is human history. This is human nature. This is what people have been for their entire lives. For as long as there have been people, that's been what there is. That's human beings in action. The third world is humanity. They're not the freaks. We're the freaks. We're the freaks. And once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. Because then you begin to realize that because we grow up in this bubble of security and prosperity that's brought to us by the hard work of honest businessmen, which is the enormous majority of businesses, and the hard work of not only the businessmen and the entrepreneurs, but the people who get up every morning and go to work. They've generated enough wealth for this country, sent that wealth out into China and out into India and the rest of the world. They've made the world rich through their hard work. And they've kept that freedom and that prosperity as the result of the sacrifice of the men and women in our armed forces. So we're the freaks. And we are genetically self-selected to be freaks. All the people that got sick and tired of living in sewers and got sick and tired of handing the chickens or the scrawny potatoes into a basket and giving it to the Duke or the Earl or whatever, all the people said, screw this. Got on a boat or a wagon or a cart or loaded a bindle and threw some things into a blanket and wrapped it up, threw it over the shoulder, went somewhere else, came here, and here we are, Freak Nation. One of the people I talked to at a cocktail party last Friday at a fundraiser for Hillsdale College was also in the armed forces as I can't tell you what he did, but he's a highly placed guy at the tip of the spear. And he said, you talk about the third world, but he said there is a second world, he said even Europe is not America. It's not there. It's not quite there. It's true. Poor Americans have more living space than middle-class Europeans. Poor Americans have a much higher chance of having air conditioning, much higher chance of having a cell phone, much higher chance of having a car than middle-class Europeans. So, yeah, freak nation. And so the question is, how do you come to grips with it? One of the things you have to do is you have to understand how rare it is. I think the reason that Afterburner I did called 3.5 Days did the kind of business it did, it was on the news cycle. Let me just get this up a little bit higher. It was on the news cycle. That didn't hurt with Occupy Wall Street. But what 3.5 Days was about, really, when you get right down to it, is don't take this stuff for granted. People are out there working their tails off so that you don't have to go and skin animals and cart your own water and, don't take it for granted. Be grateful. Go spend 3 days out in the wilderness and boil your own water and catch snakes or rabbits and skin them alive and do all these other horrible things that everybody else in the world has to do all the time. And then you'll appreciate what you've got here. But the reason that I was so moved to take the question, to be honest with you, is because the term likelihood, that's really what it comes down to for me. When I think about my existence, I think obviously, luck and fortune and all this other stuff. But I think about just the unlikelihood of it, the rarity, you can't. How do you not go through life filled with the sense of not just gratitude, just kind of awe at how unlikely this is that you were born in this country and have all these opportunities and freedoms compared to the rest of the world, compared to human history. One of the things I'll say often when I talk about wealth creation is I'll say, 100 years ago, the wealthiest Americans in the world, or the wealthiest Brits in the world for that matter, would go to a giant event and they might, if they were really showing off, show up in a carriage drawn by 8 horses. More likely they'd show up in a carriage drawn by 4 horses. When I go to an event, I show up in a carriage drawn by 360 horses, and I'm not the richest American by a long margin. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. And it's it's not just a crime to not appreciate it. It's an actual honest-to-God sin. So, the way you come to grips with it is you just have to appreciate it. You just have to be grateful for it, and you have to just be thankful and understand how rare it is and how lucky you are, and don't take it for granted, and do everything you can to try to preserve it. I do what I can to try to preserve it, and I work my tail off as hard as I possibly can. That's what I do to kind of earn it, and I think you kind of end up with that Saving Private Ryan kind of moment, right? I mean, isn't that the thing that was the most moving about that movie, is that moment at the end when it's like, there's Ben Affleck, there's Private Ryan, all these guys have died so that he can live. How do you handle that debt? How do you handle that burden? We were talking about this earlier tonight. How do you handle the guilt? How do you handle the guilt? And the answer is you just earn it. Earn it. Go out and earn it. Do something to keep it going and do something to pass it on. That's a great question. It's really, really interesting. I do think about it all the time. I'm going to try and take as many of these as I can. I got a lot to do, but we'll try and speed up a little bit on them. Bill Thompson asks, how do you convince a lefty that giving assistance to those in need is godly on an individual level, noble on a local level, good at a state level, but detestable at the federal level? Well, I don't know if I'd break it down quite so into quite so many categories. I think if I was going to answer that question to the degree that I can answer it, I would say this. When you give something to somebody else voluntarily, that's charity. And the act of giving of your own resources to someone in need, despite what many objectivists would say, in my opinion, that's a virtue. And the reason it's a virtue is because it's voluntary. This leads to a bigger issue to which I'll get in a minute. If, on the other hand, you believe that the state should come and take money from people at gunpoint and then redistribute it to people in need, that's not virtue. That's coercion. That's not virtue at all. And that's the difference, Bill. The difference is giving assistance on a voluntary level, working in your church, working in a charity, voluntarily writing a check. Conservatives are far more generous in terms of charity than liberals are, because they don't have to. They pay their taxes, same as everybody else, more than everybody else generally. And then in addition to that, they're moved by certain causes or certain individuals or certain organizations like your church, or maybe they like Veterans Affairs, or maybe they see a guy on the street, whatever. And they give more than than is taken from them to help disadvantaged people. And that's actual charity. That's virtue. When you're in favor of turning up the screws on taking more and more and more of people's hard-earned money and taking it by force and then giving it to other people, that's not virtue. That's coercion. That's enforcing your will on other people. Which leads me to the bigger issue. I think the reason I wanted to get into this question just a little bit is, I think one of the problems we have as conservatives is a belief that we can enforce virtue from without. Liberals have this belief as well. It's just a different set of values, I suppose. When you talk about some of these issues, the gay marriage issue, the abortion issue, I'm not going to get into those. I'm not afraid of getting into them. I'm not going to get into them now because I don't have time. These are huge issues. But what you come down to is you want to have the government on the side of what you perceive to be right, and so do I actually. But I'll clarify this further by saying you should not, under any circumstances, lie down for having the government take money from you and then use those things to do things that you perceive to be evil. I understand the idea of being complicit in evil in that sense. I get that too. But I do think on some level there's an awful lot on our team of this idea that when we see laws or reduction of things like the drug laws or this kind of thing, that it promotes a lack of virtue, and that it's our job to enforce virtue. And to the degree that happens, I disagree. I don't think you can enforce virtue. In fact, I think the definition of virtue is that it's unforced and uncoerced. If it becomes coerced, if it becomes law, it's not virtue anymore. It's the internal willingness of it. And that gets us back to this giant idea about kind of this Christianity and the fundamental core belief system of America. Despite what the left will tell you, and what I believe for most of the middle of my life, that the founders were a bunch of atheists and so on and so forth, they weren't. And one of the things you completely hear, even from the most deist or theist of them, guys like Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, the theme that runs through all of the founders all the time is that this form of government is appropriate for a virtuous, and they would often say a religious country. And the reason for all this is very simple, folks. We all believe in limited government. We all like the idea of limited government. But if the people are not virtuous, then not only do they not deserve limited government, they're not going to get it. If people are cheating and stealing and taking other people's stuff and hurting people, you need a government, a state, to enforce a large series of laws and regulations. But if they're internally mastered, if they're internally guided, and if they're internally regulated, then you don't need all of this stuff, because if virtue comes from within, you can let people be free, because most of the people, most of the time, won't do won't do the wrong thing. They'll do the right thing. They'll be virtuous. So I think that's really what it comes down to. Bill, if you're trying to argue with lefties that having the state do all these things, it's not virtue. It's not goodness. It's not charity. It's not kindness. It's coercion. And you might as well take that money and use it to kill people, because it's not an act of moral superiority. And you've got to knock these people off their perch. The people who say, well, we should raise taxes so that we can do good with it. You're not doing good by taking people's money at gunpoint. That's not good. Doing good, moral superiority comes from willingly doing something that involves some sacrifice. You don't get to point a gun at other people's head, take their money out of their wallet, give it to somebody else, and then claim that you're some paragon of virtue. You're not. You're a thief. You can't enforce virtue on people, and you can't legislate virtue on people. So that's where I would go with that one, Bill. Joshua Tiemens says, is it naive or noble to want to make your enemies into friends? Abraham Lincoln, who knew something about conflict, had something to say about that. He said the best way to eliminate an enemy is to turn him into a friend. Something close to that. It's absolutely correct, and it's correct mathematically. It's not just a good thing and a noble thing and the right thing to do, although it's all of those things in my opinion. If you can turn an enemy into a friend, just look at the math. I mean, seriously, there's a mathematical reason for doing this. Let's just say that there are a Republican and a Democrat, and a Republican and a Democrat, and a Republican and a Democrat, and the way the national election works for president, let's say, is a Republican votes, a Democrat votes, those votes cancel out. A Republican vote, Democrats vote, those votes cancel out. And then when it's all stacked up at the very end, whoever has more votes on top of that has the majority, and that candidate wins the election. Now, if you want to win an election, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can eliminate the Democratic vote, which means that it's 1 and 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 1, 1 and gap. In other words, you've convinced them not to vote Democrat anymore, so they're not voting anymore. So that's good. But if you can actually flip them, if you can actually convince them of the obvious moral and practical and ethical and philosophical and historical and logical advantages of conservatism, if you can actually turn them into a conservative, you not only take the Republican vote and a gap where the Democrat used to be, now you have 2 Republican votes. You have 1 less of theirs and 1 more of ours. So it's not like a bye or a tie, which you would get when you pull somebody out of the enemy column. When you move them to the friendly column, you've doubled the effectiveness of it. So in a good world, you would like to say that, well, I've been spending my life trying to defeat socialism and liberalism, although I hate that word because traditional liberal, classical liberal is a great term. Progressivism. I've been fighting progressivism all my life. So if I can convince a progressive that progressivism is a lie and that progressivism is, bad for people, and it is, if I can convince them not to vote for progressives, that's half a win for me. That's a half a win. That means that there's nobody checking my vote. But if I can convince them to become a conservative, then that's the full win. Because not only are they not in the enemy column, not only is that not a enemy soldier that I have to fight, but now it's another guy on my team. It's another rifle on my side. And that's why winning friends is so important. And it's not naive to want to do that. It's as savvy as you get, and it's also noble. Because frankly, if I didn't think these ideas were true and good for people, I'd be promoting other ideas that I did think were noble or good for people. So if I believe these things and I have a good reason for believing these things, then I would like to convince other people to believe them too, because I believe it would be good for them. I believe that this is good for everybody. I don't believe in zero-sum games. I don't believe that we take resources from poor people or other people and use them to our advantage and their disadvantage. I believe it's good for everybody. So I want to turn them into friends because I think they have a right to be happy and a right to be correct. So that's the answer to that one. And the Tiemens Show continues with Isaac Tiemens making a guest appearance. The question is, are the Western democracies incapable of waging war to win? No, but First of all, the Western democracies are pretty new. There really hasn't been a Western democracy club since really the end of World War II. And it's a funny coincidence because I've said a few times in the past, since the end of World War II, we've been involved in any number of police actions, but we've certainly been involved in a few major hot shooting wars. We've been involved in Korea. We were involved in Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, and obviously adventures in Panama and Grenada and God knows where. But we've been at war several times since the end of World War II. But as I've said many times before, the world has not seen America all the way angry since August 9th of 1945. That's the last time the world saw America really angry. And we haven't been angry since. We talked, I think, in a previous episode about how different the world would have been if they'd used nuclear weapons against the Chinese in Korea. How many lives that would have saved over time. Millions of lives would have been saved if they'd used some nuclear weapons on those Chinese military formations coming to the aid of North Korea. Because if they had done that, they would have basically stopped this socialist guerrilla power grab that took place in Korea and Vietnam and South America and all these places. Would have made it clear that Western democracies, the idea of republic and freedom, meant something to us, and we were ready to fight for it and fight for it with everything we had. But we haven't been angry or all the way at war since August 9th of 1945. And we know this to be true. The question is, can those kind of wars be fought again? I don't know. 9/11 is an interesting example. I happen to think, personally, that our response to 9/11 was actually pretty appropriate. Some people disagree with me, but I think it was pretty appropriate. Osama bin Laden, it's not my opinion, it's not what I think he said. This is not my Harvard faculty law lounge opinion. This is what Osama bin Laden said to his other people in multiple communications. He said he thought America was a paper tiger, that they defeated the Soviets, who were much tougher than us, and that all he had to do was hit us just a little bit, and we would collapse like a paper tiger. He said his people wanted to be behind the strong horse. He thought that Al-Qaeda were the strong horse because they were savage and brutal, and like everybody else who've ever looked at America as an enemy, thought we were weak and stupid and fat. We may have been stupid and fat, but in history, a few times, they've made that calculation, and then we've gotten angry. And when we get angry, we're not weak at all. And we're suddenly not stupid, and we're suddenly not fat. And they never learn, and we never learn. So it seems to me that the cycle of the Western democracies with regard to war is this. The Western democracies, because of their capitalist intentions, their strong understanding of science and engineering principles, and their self-correcting mechanism, at least presumably, of democracy with individual rights protected by a republic, generate enormous amounts of wealth. That wealth is visible to the rest of the world, and that wealth gives the people who live in these countries a sense of ease and comfort and an unwillingness to risk things. This is all perfectly understandable to me. We're not going to go to war over little things because we got too much to lose. This model, there's a intellectual game. Sometimes these little thought experiments help clarify more complex issues. And the one that I think applies to us is if you have a car in one lane and it's a brand new Mercedes-Benz, and in the second lane over, you've got a 1978 Pinto, and both cars are going to try and merge into that middle lane, and they both see each other merging, who do you think's going to blink? Who do you think's at the last second going to swerve away if both of those guys want that lane? Well, the argument is that it's going to be the Mercedes that's going to swerve because the Pinto has got so many dings and scratches and dents on it already. Another dent's nothing to him. He's got nothing to lose. The Mercedes, on the other hand, is immaculate. He's not going to get this perfectly beautiful car dinged or scratched up for some Pinto, and if he does, it's going to cost him a fortune to get it fixed. That's kind of the calculation that these savages make with us. They know they're driving a beat-up old clunker. They know that we're driving a brand new Mercedes, and they assume that if it becomes head-to-head kind of, one or the other of us is going to move into this middle ground, they think we're going to blink. And generally speaking, they're right. Generally speaking, they're right. We do blink because we do have more to lose. But every now and then, they do something that makes it clear to us that if we don't act, we're going to lose the Mercedes and we're going to end up with a piece of crap clunker just like them. And when that happens, then the great Western, especially American, psychological transformation takes place. And once again, our enemies stand in dumbfounded awe at the gigantic, horrific mistake they made. It's not just bin Laden. The Japanese made precisely the same calculation that bin Laden made, and they made it in the late 1930s. They looked at America. They said America's prosperous, America's fat, decadent, weak. They don't have the warrior spirit that we have. They don't have the willingness to go to war. They're soft, unserious, jazz age party people. They'll never, ever, ever have the kind of fighting spirit that we have. They're never going to want to take the kind of losses that we're prepared to take. And so therefore, if we sink their fleet in Pearl Harbor with one stroke, they would rise up to defend America. There's no question about that, but the Japanese never wanted to do that. The Japanese figured if they sank our fleet at Pearl Harbor, then we would basically surrender the Pacific. And really all the Japanese wanted was the Western Pacific. They figured maybe America might fight for Hawaii, but they certainly aren't going to fight for Singapore, or they're not going to fight for the Marianas or any of that stuff. So they thought we were weak and stupid and had too much to lose, and we were driving that Mercedes. So if they sank our fleet at Pearl Harbor, we'd just call it a day. But they didn't understand what happens when you scratch the paint on the Mercedes. It pisses us off quite a lot. So bin Laden made that miscalculation, and the Imperial High Command, Tojo military clique, made that miscalculation. And World War I's a little muddy, but you can also basically even go to the Civil War. And I know a lot of people have different views about the Civil War and who was the right side on the Civil War and states' rights and everything, and the giant federal government. Put all that aside for a second. When the South decided to secede, their vision of the North was a nation of greasy mechanics and mudsills. They thought that Northern people were indoor people, that they were weak, inbred, pale, sick, and that the Southern man, who spent his entire life outdoors in the field on horses, because that's what soldiering was in those days, was worth 10 or 50 or 100 Yankees. So the hot-blooded, the fire eaters took the Confederacy to war against the Union. And people who understood the psychology of the Union, the difference between really hot-headed South Carolinians and staid, quiet Pennsylvania Lutherans, they understood that the difference between these two was that the South was a piece of flash paper where you would put a torch to it and it would go up in a brilliant flash of energy and rhetoric and passion, but that the North was a boiler. It was a giant boiler filled with cold water, and that you had to light a fire under it, and that fire had to burn for a year or two. But once that fire started burning, it wasn't going to go out. And once that fire was lit, no matter how long it took to get that water heated up, it was not going to stop. And that boiler, once lit, was going to produce so much steam energy that nothing could stand in its way. And many people in the North understood that about the Northern people. That's why the North was slow to get into the war. That's why the U.S. was slow to get into World War II and slow to start winning World War II. All this stuff is the same pattern. It's like we are so fundamentally peaceful and averse to war. This is why the great slander against America as being a warlike country is absurd. I hung out and still hang out among conservatives and hawks and soldiers and former generals. I hang out with defense contractors. I talk with special forces guys all the time. I talk with guys in the intelligence community. I talk with all of the people who are on the sharp, pointy end of the American spear. And I can tell you, I've been doing this for 15, 20 years. I wanted to be one of them. And I'm telling you that I have never, ever, 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 ever heard any one of them so much as hint around the edges of wanting to go conquer another country for territory or resources, period, full stop, end of sentence. I've never, ever, ever, ever heard it. And why should we? We live in paradise. What the hell would we want with Djibouti or Saudi Arabia or France, for that matter? Honestly, we just don't have any interest in it. We don't want it. We live in paradise, and all of the stuff we do is to defend this idea. So the Western democracies are very slow to war. So the question is there a world where America, so I can't answer for the Western democracies in Europe, I suspect that they won't fight for anything ever. I think they are, in fact, so R-selected. They're so better read than dead. You want an R psychology slogan, better read than dead is as good as you get. They'd rather be communists than free, than risk dying. They'd rather be free. But if it came down to dying or risk dying versus being communist, they'd be communist. If it came down to being Muslims or risk dying for freedom, they'd be Muslims. I think they're utterly inbred, passive, weak, submissive people. So the question is, what would get America fighting? Would a nuclear attack on New York City do it? 9/11 was fairly close to a nuclear attack, in terms of the number of, the amount of energy released. It's certainly, if they hadn't evacuated those towers, it would have been 30,000 killed instead of, 3,000 killed. I don't know. I don't know. I think if a nuclear bomb went off in Times Square, speaking for myself as president, if a nuclear weapon goes off on American soil, then many nuclear weapons are going to go off someplace else. That's just going to happen. And I don't care if it's a tent. If I found out that a nuclear bomb was detonated in Times Square and that the people that did it were two people living in a tent in the Sahara, they'd get the biggest bomb I had, and they'd get 10 of them. I'd put 10 nuclear weapons over that tent, and they can experience the bright white light of freedom themselves. So I don't know what happens. I don't know. What would cause the Western democracies to fight? I think the only answer to that question is, Isaac, is it has to be perceived as the end of all of this abundance and security. We have to understand that if we don't fight, then we're going to lose it. And frankly, I don't know. I thought the response to 9/11 was appropriate. Osama bin Laden calculated that if he hit us hard enough, we'd surrender. The cost to that decision was not just his life, far too small a price to get in exchange for the number of people that died and what we lost. What that decision cost the Islamic Caliphate was two countries. It cost them two countries. It cost them control of Afghanistan to the Taliban, and it cost them Iraq. We took two countries off the board. That's what we did. And Al-Qaeda was an operationally functional, extremely deadly fighting force on September 10th. But after September 11th, the number of recruits that rallied to Al-Qaeda because of this big victory over the Great Satan was enormous. There were hundreds of thousands of dedicated terrorists ready to come to America and do what they'd done on 9/11. And we didn't fight them at Disneyland, and we didn't fight them at the mall. We killed them in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where they are. They're buried in the sands of Iraq and Afghanistan. They're dead over there instead of over here because of the 4,000 people we lost in Iraq and the 3,000 or 4,000 people we're losing in Afghanistan. Our soldiers are fighting their soldiers instead of their soldiers killing our civilians. That's the way it should be. That's why I back the military. That's why we have a military. But this is not America fully angry. I don't know. I think the only way I can really answer your question for you is to say, Isaac, that there is a Western democracy that I think is capable of waging a war to win, and that is Israel. There's fairly widely known, Operation Samson? The Israelis probably have 500 nuclear weapons. They may have more nuclear weapons than we do, frankly. They've got hundreds of them anyway. And I think it's fairly widely known to the people that are trying to drive Israel into the sea, that the Israeli position is, we can't stop you from being driven into the sea. We don't have that many people. Our country's the size of, LA County. But before we're driven into the sea, every country allied against us is going to turn to dust. I admire that so much, that clarity, that absolute clarity, that moral clarity, that willingness to say, this society, this religion, this people, this culture, so horribly outnumbered, you will not win. You can defeat us, but you will not win. We will eliminate you from the face of the earth. Israel has that kind of willpower. We do too. I just can't imagine a threat of that magnitude, frankly. If there were nuclear weapons detonated in an American city, I think the President of the United States, even this one, would have to respond with a nuclear response, and if he didn't, he'd be chased out of the White House with torches and dogs. So I don't know. I have a horrible feeling we're going to get a chance to find out. I don't think there's much question that I am not going to live to see a nuclear exchange. I don't think it's going to be over American cities, and I don't think it's going to be American weapons, but I think we're going to see nuclear weapons deployed in this earth, and we're gonna have iPhone footage of mushroom clouds in the aftermath. I just don't know where it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be here. I should just say parenthetically, when you think about the threats to our cities with bombs that are smuggled in on freighters, or this idea of a suitcase nuke doesn't actually exist, but certainly deliverable nuclear weapons to the United States. I should just say, for your own peace of mind, that I don't have a security clearance, and if I did, I wouldn't be talking about this. But since I don't, I can speculate. I do know that the sensitivity of our detection apparatus is absolutely astonishing. If a container with a warhead sailed 1,000 miles off the tip of the Cape of Good Hope, we'd know about it. It's remarkable. And that gives me some peace of mind. I wish the intelligence services were more focused on threats to the country from outside and a little less worried about what American citizens are saying to each other. Let's see. Let's move on. Karsten Mueller has an interesting question, which may surprise you for the answer on this. She said, if you had the question to get into a spaceship, a nice big one, with all the shebang, fully automated, autopilot, etc., going into deep space knowing you will never come back, but you would be the first to see what's out there, the data to be transmitted back to Earth, would you go? In other words, would you go on a suicide mission if you got a chance to see Jupiter up close, or the rings of Saturn? Or would you go to Mars knowing that you're not coming back from Mars? And I think most people know I've wanted to be a space guy my whole life. I've wanted to do these kind of things my whole life. My whole life was designed to put a flag on Mars. So the question is, would I go in a spaceship headed one way to see all these things? And the answer is a resounding no. I would not. I don't like suicide missions, and I think suicide missions are un-American. I don't believe we've ever had a genuine suicide mission in the way that the kamikazes were suicide missions. Kamikaze pilots were not, they were bolted into their cockpits. They had no landing gear. They're not coming back. They're going to die, and they know they're going to die. Without question, the United States has had many different situations in its military where we've sent guys on missions where the odds were so long they've been called a suicide mission, where the odds were so great that they were told the chances of you coming back is next to zero, but it's not zero, and so since it's not zero, it's not a suicide mission. And if you don't understand that fundamental difference, that's where the point of this argument is. Would I go on a mission where the chance of coming back was slim? I think I probably would. It would depend on how slim. But I wouldn't go on a suicide mission, and I wouldn't go on a mission where I wasn't coming back. I want to come back. I'd go on risky missions, but I'd want to know what the risks were, and I want to know what the mitigation of the risks were, and I want to know what the failure mode of the risks were. I want to know what our plan B and plan C are, if there is a plan B or plan C. So I would do all those things, and I'd be willing to take a risk, and yes, a big risk. But I wouldn't go to not come back. Which brings us to an interesting other point. Again, another reason why I wanted to take this question, and that is this idea of space exploration. When I was a kid, I thought, hey man, I'm going to go live on Mars or going to live on the moon for the rest of my life. I have no desire to do that anymore. I have an enormous desire to go to the moon. I have an enormous desire to go to Mars. I have an enormous desire to do all of these things. But I'd like to come back home. And as I get older and out of my teens, I begin to realize that the idea of just being trapped in your apartment for the rest of your life would be pretty horrible, and that's really what we're talking about. Be nice if you live on the moon. Every now and then you could suit up and you could walk outside and you could see the surface of the moon. But if you lived there and you were never coming back, you'd never ever get to breathe fresh air again. You never get to be outdoors again. And I think that even if I were to set up a colony in Antarctica, that's a whole different animal. There's summers in Antarctica. You know, if you're trying to get away from the giant state or whatever, there's summers. You go outside, you can walk around, you can throw a baseball around, you can breathe, you can walk, you can go outside. And so because you can go outside, a colony becomes a city. It's not a spam camp. So even if I was the first person to see the rings of Saturn or the cloud deck of Jupiter or another Earth, I don't think I would do it if the conditions were you're not coming back. I just don't think I would. I kind of want to live. I want, and the people I would want. This is an important distinction. The people that I would want to take with me would want to live too. You know, I don't want to go with people that are ready to pack it up. And you know, now this the great thing about Stratosphere Lounge is all these thoughts kind of come to me on the fly because I don't really look at these in advance. But ultimately, isn't that really? I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to tell you what I think. I think of all the things I like most about my favorite fictional hero, that unwillingness to just roll over is his best quality. That's what I love about James T. Kirk. I love the fact that he never gives up. He's always fighting to save his ship, and if he can't save his ship, he'll save his crew. That quality is profound. And I think if you get to a state, because they had this discussion not there too long ago, there's a mission that's planned to go to Mars one way. Anybody who knows the fundamentals, and I mean just the basics of space travel, knows that it's not like you have to carry twice as much stuff to go there and come back. You have to carry 30 times as much stuff, because you have to move the stuff, and then you have to carry the fuel to slow that stuff down, and then you have to carry, in the initial launch, enough fuel to speed it back up again, and then enough fuel to slow it back down again. So a one-way trip is a much, 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 much easier, much, 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 much easier deal than a round trip. And so they had a big thing recently where they were talking about, would you go to Mars if you weren't going to come back? Would you go and colonize Mars? I've given this a lot of thought. Colonizing Mars means living at the bottom of the ocean. You have to understand that. Because Mars is a vacuum. Mars has 1% of the surface atmospheric pressure of the Earth. It is, for all intents and purposes, the surface of the moon, which means it is, for all intents and purposes, the bottom of the ocean. Your entire life is going to be spent in a can. And I'm not willing to do it. I'll do years. I would do years. You would have to do years. Would I do a mission to Jupiter if it was 5 years long? You bet I would. Would I do it if I was 10 or 20? Yeah, I think I probably would. But on some level, I'd like to retire to a nice house in Montana and walk outside and listen to a river. You know, that's me. When I was younger, I felt differently. When I was younger, I felt I would do the spam can. But I'm going to go a little further with this and say there's something. Again, decent. This is just me. But one of the things I've come to admire about myself is I've come to admire the fact that I wouldn't go on a one-way mission anymore, or I wouldn't want to spend the rest of my life in a can. There's something American in my mind about going to Mars, spending 5 years on Mars, getting cooped up in a can. I'm all ready to do all of that. I am. But I think as your reward, you should get to come home and live on a farm or a ranch in Montana. I can't imagine wanting to live the rest of my life in a can. And I think one of the reasons that people misunderstand this is that they have this different. They have, I think, a very, very romantic view, as I did for most of my life, of what that kind of life would be. I mean, if you're talking about the first people to Mars, or a one-way mission out of the solar system as a flyby mission of Jupiter and Saturn, let's say, and you saw things that no other human eyes would see, it's like you are going to live in your office for the rest of your life, or your apartment. That's it. It's a prison sentence, and I don't want to live the rest of my life in prison. I want to go there, see cool stuff, and then I want to come back. I want to come back and brag about it. I want to do what the funniest guy in the world does. I want to go land on the moon, land on Mars, put the first flag down, do all these awesome things. Then I want to come back and do exactly what Brian Regan said at a dinner party. I just want to sit there and let these guys run about having their 15 different companies and driving on the Autobahn in my BMW, and they're running on a me monster about how great their life is. And then you just get to sit back and just go, I walked on the moon. If you haven't seen Brian Regan, I Walked on the Moon, I can't recommend it highly enough. I walked on the moon. It's funny you were talking about driving on the Autobahn. I remember we were driving in my lunar rover across the Sea of Tranquility, and I thought, are we going too fast? And I realized, of course not. There's nobody else on the moon. Yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to come back and brag about it. Okay, moving on. Let me see here. Should be straightforward. Won't take long. Matt Jarvis wants to know, Pulp Fiction. Vincent Vega, the character Vincent Vega, played by John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. Great character, great performance, great role, great movie. Hero or villain? Villain. Mass murdering assassin. Villain. Just because he's cool and got a nice haircut and can dance doesn't mean he's a good guy. He's a murderer for hire. He's a villain. He's a bad guy. I don't care how charming he is. Charming makes him more dangerous. He's a villain. Next question. Oliver Regal Perez says, can you speak to the unfortunate European proclivity towards socialism based on the evolution of European governments from monarchies to democracies? This question goes back to what we talked about earlier, Oliver, and that is that the European democracies and their proclivity towards socialism is not a problem with Europe. It's not a problem with the Europeans. It's not an emotional aberration or anything. That's human nature. You know, socialism is feudalism. Socialism it's feudalism. You've got the masses who essentially have very limited power, who don't own anything, and then you've got the aristocracy that runs everything, and the aristocracy, instead of being the 18th son of the Earl of this, is somebody who got the best test scores and went to a certain university. And mark my words, give socialism long enough, all of these titles will become hereditary. They're hereditary in socialist dictatorships. Look at North Korea. So I don't think that there's a European proclivity towards socialism. I think socialism, Fitch knows today, I think socialism is just the natural outgrowth of the human desire to fear freedom and the human desire for security over freedom. This is the standard default condition, not only of humans, it's the default condition of mammals, at least mammals, and probably all animals, biological life forms. This is why a bear will hang out in a national park and eat garbage instead of walking across the river to get fresh salmon, because it's easier to eat garbage than it is to hunt salmon. The salmon's infinitely better food, but it's easier. All biological creatures are wired to do the easy thing, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it. You know, when you strip out all of the nonsense, what it really comes down to is calories in versus calories out, right? That's what staying alive comes down to. When you really get right down to it, survival comes down to effort to take food in versus calories spent doing it. So if there's a bunch of food lying on the ground and it's crap food, most creatures will eat the crap food rather than spend calories to go and get better food. It's true for bacteria. It's true for bears. True for people, too. So if you give them crap and you make it delivered to their door, people would rather have crap delivered to their door than to go out and work for something nice. It's just that simple. Everybody's that way. All animals that way, or all humans are that way. With the limited exception in a very small number of individuals and with a very small window in history of a self-selected group of Homo sapien freaks who had an open territory and the word got out, and these few people, this small percentage of the total population that has this genetic defect, which is risk-taking, which is a trait expressed on a gene, and my friend Courtney could tell you which gene it was, and on the 7th allele, she'll tell you exactly where it is. But when you have that gene, you would rather risk freedom than take the security. And those freaks got together and created this prosperity engine, this reactor, that's generated prosperity for the whole world. And that's why they hate us, because they don't understand us and they fear us, because we're freaks and we are willing to risk for success. More and more and more, that trait's being bred out of this culture, which is the only culture in the world that was ever built around it. But really, when you get right down to it, Americans are the richest people in the world because we risk security for prosperity. We'll give up security for freedom, and freedom means competition. Competition means prosperity and success. We're Ks. But put RK aside. We are risk takers, and it's in our genetics. And it's... See, the nice thing about saying it's in our genetics is I'm not saying it's in our race. I'm not even saying it's in our culture. I'm saying it's in our genetics. What I'm saying is that there's this risk-taking gene that is found in individuals in Africa, and it's found in individuals in Europe, and it's found in individuals in China, and it's found in individuals in South America. It's found in individuals everywhere. It's expressed in certain ways. It's probably extremely recessive, but it is there everywhere. And when Ronald Reagan talked about all of those lost souls hurtling through the darkness for home, heading towards home, what he's basically saying is this profound idea that we understand to be absolutely true. And that idea is that right at this very moment, there are millions, if not tens, if not hundreds of millions of Americans who happen to be living in other countries because they were born there. But they're Americans. They're as American as any of us, and they need to come home. They need to get over here. They're doing what they can over there, and they need to drop their bags and get over here. The problem is that here we have a large number of people who were born in America who aren't American at all. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to compete. They don't want freedom. They don't want it. They're afraid of it. They need to go over there. Those Americans who are born overseas needs to come over here. Everything be copacetic. If I could trade a liberal professor at a university for an Ethiopian who set up a factory making sandals out of used tires, I would do it every single time. I'd cycle that pump as fast as I could. I'd take every one of them. I'd take every one they had in the store. I'd take the population of the United States. We're 300 million now. I go to 500, 600 million. I go to billion. I go to 2 billion. If every one of them was here to make their own way and not drawing resources from the rest of us. You ever flown over the western United States? There's nothing between Los Angeles, between Riverside, which is pretty damn near desert anyway, between Riverside and St. Louis, there's nothing. There's plenty of room, there's plenty of resources, there's plenty of space, there's plenty of everything. The reason we can't have 200 million immigrants coming into the country is because they would take the resources and they'd get on the welfare and they'd do all that other stuff. But just think if there were another 100 million or 200, what if you doubled the population of America and brought in 300 million of the most motivated, hardworking, selfless people in the world whose only desire was to provide top quality goods and services and reap the profit of it? This country would be a paradise. Paradise. So, for those of you who say we're anti-immigrant, we're not. We love our immigrants. We don't even, I'm speaking for myself again, I don't even consider them immigrants. Somebody who spent their entire life doing the right thing and filling out the forms and standing in line to come here from Hong Kong or Kenya or Ukraine or Bogota, Colombia, they're Americans. They need to come home. But America's an idea. And it's a land of people based on an idea. It's a population selected for that idea. And if they've got that gene going, then trot it out. And I would rather live in an America that was 100% black or 100% Chinese or 100% pick a color, I don't care, East Indian, I would rather live in an America that had 300 million black people in it and I was the only white person if every single one of those people had the American attitude of self-reliance, self-respect, hard work, and responsibility. I would so much rather live in an America that had 300 million black people with that attitude than live in an all-white America that had this attitude that we see now among the whitest of white Americans, which are the people in the ivory towers in Harvard University and at MSNBC. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's all about the attitude. So, moving on. Cindy Lou Sin says, does denim define us as Americans? Can denim unite? Do brand names divide? Cindy, denim does define us as Americans. That kind of goes back to the question I took a few moments ago from about the spaceship trip. You know, it's funny. When I was a kid, I was waiting for my spandex jacket and my flight suit. And I still love wearing a flight suit. By the way, I had a fun weekend down at Flight Deck in a flight sim. I got to wear my own glider pilot flight suit that I haven't worn in 15, 20 years. But I soloed in a flight suit, and I made sure it was gray. It was a gray flight suit because I didn't want anybody to think if I was wearing either tan or sage green. I don't want anybody to think I was trying to be a military pilot. No military pilots in our country use gray, so I wore gray. But I was in a flight suit. And I love flight suits, and I love, there's some pictures of me on Instagram in an actual spacesuit. And I like wearing the spacesuit. And all this stuff is part of my, it's part of my Sid Mead future, right? I want to wear the spandex, and I like looking good in a suit, and I like wearing nice Italian clothes and all this other stuff. But is denim American? You're damn right it is. And that's when I began to realize, I began to have these thoughts that actually America, there is something about Montana, just as an example, right, as a picture. That idea of the most technologically advanced country in the world, kind of country that puts flags on the moon, kind of country that flies to Jupiter and Mars, doesn't think anything of it, the kind of country that builds a nuclear rocket in their backyard, puts it into orbit, and then just goes. And yet, those same people don't live in hives or cities. Those people live in places like, I almost said the name of the town in Idaho, which is the most beautiful place I've ever been to in my life, but I'm not going to mention its name because I don't want people to go there. I promised them I wouldn't say. But the idea that you can do these things and still live a life that is in nature, fresh air and outdoors and the sound of rivers. And if you've ever been on a river, and many of you are outdoors a lot more than me, if you've ever been on a river, if you've ever gone down a river in Montana or been to Wyoming or just Dallas or in the desert in Arizona or down the coast of Malibu or whatever, this idea of being outdoors, this idea of being fundamentally rural, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is fascinating to me because when I was in my 20s and 30s and Japan was really starting to rise in the late 70s, 80s, throughout the 80s before they got into their 2-decade-long recession, I remember thinking, look how high-tech Japan is and how cool it is. They have these little hotels that are like little cells and all this other stuff. And I thought, high-tech and it's cool and it's neat and all this space stuff that appealed to me. I realized, wait a minute now. I've been invited to ranches. It's not my property. I've been outdoors in America, in paradise. And you're damn right, denim is American. We should wear our pressure suits when we're at work. We should come home and put on some jeans. And there's another side to the denim too, which is not just the outdoor side. There's also the cool side. I forget who said it. Great thing about watching the show live, folks, is if you're not watching it live, is that if I ask a question live and I don't know the answer, pretty soon it's going to pop up in that question. So I'll say something. There's about a 5-6 second lag for it to get to you. Then somebody does a little research or they already know it and they type it into the comment section, comes back to me, and I have my answer. It's like Brainiac. With appropriate lag for the relays to cycle. Make that same sound that Robbie the Robot makes when he's thinking. So, I forget who said this. It might have, if it wasn't James Dean, it should have been. But somebody once said, in a very sneering, condescending way, I'll probably mangle this, that's why it'll be corrected. But some European said in a sneering, kind of condescending way, "Oh, you Americans, all you're about are motorcycles, hamburgers, and rock and roll." And this guy turned to him, he said, "Yeah, but what else do you need?" That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yep. Motorcycles, rock and roll, and hamburgers. What else do you need? What else do you need, man? And anybody who's ever been on the road, you don't have to be on a motorcycle, but anyone who's ever gone on a road trip knows that it's a three-way combination, right? You're not going to have a sit-down dinner on a road trip when you're out there with the wind in your hair, blowing through the desert at 120 miles an hour, which I would certainly never, ever, ever advise doing because that's against the law. But nevertheless, this idea of being free and having 360 horses behind your carriage means that you're out there, you're going fast, there's nobody around, you're not going to hurt anybody, you're out on a straight line to the horizon, and you are hauling ass, and you're listening to rock and roll music because that music is about freedom and energy and passion and rebellion. It's about F.U. King. That's what rock and roll's about. F.U. authority. So those are the big three, right? Motorcycle, open road, a hamburger, which is a delicious, delicious, delicious top of the food chain food that you can eat with one hand so that the other hand is on the steering wheel. Or if you got a girl in the car, you can steer with your knee. And then finally, you got rock and roll music. And honest to God, I don't know if there's anything better than that. If there is, I haven't found it. Denim, baby. It's what makes us what we are. Jacob Golden says, "What is the one sentence you want to leave for future generations?" This is the only time I've ever written an answer down. Because I normally just print these questions. I take them from Facebook. I go through the thing about an hour before the show, maybe something like that, and I pick them and I copy them, paste them, put them in a little Word document, print them out, and here they are. But this one was the only one I ever wrote an answer to because I didn't want to forget it. So Jacob Golden's question is, what is the one sentence you want to leave for future generations? And I wrote my answer down in capital letters. Here is my answer. Are you ready? The one sentence that I would leave to future generations is this one. It is better to feel bad and do good than it is to feel good and do bad. That's where we are today. A bunch of people out there who have policies that are utterly destructive, that are utterly, utterly appalling, and they back them because it makes them feel good. Makes them feel good. I think the essence, one of the many fundamental differences between liberalism and conservatism is that liberals do things that are destructive, like entitlements and mental slavery. They do it so that they can feel good about themselves. And conservatives do things that feel bad, like you need to get off of this welfare thing now. That's not a fun feeling. It's much nicer to go to people with a bag of candy than to take their candy away. We do things that feel bad that we know are good. That's the fundamental difference. I'll read it to you again. If I had to pass a sentence down to the next generations, it would be, it is better to feel bad and do good than it is to feel good and do bad. Pure and simple. If you want to get back into the RK thing, this is one of the things that I had a chance to speak about with the author, Anonymous Conservative. And he basically said, when you really, really, really get all of the stuff stripped away, Bill, what it really comes down to is, ultimately, because conservatives have a bigger, a more developed amygdala, they're more, their threat assessment apparatus gets more exercised than liberals. That's why liberals have heart attacks and conniption fits and call the police when a kid chews a Pop-Tart into the general shape of a pistol. Their threat assessment situation is so poorly used, and they're so afraid of unpleasant stimuli that they get these hysterical reactions over nothing. But what he really said when you get right down to it is this. He said conservatives would rather have unpleasantness now and peace later, and liberals would rather have peace now and unpleasantness later. It's just that simple. I think that's exactly right. Why is it the conservatives are so doom and gloom all the time? Why do we always talk about economic collapse or nuclear war or Al-Qaeda or all these other things? Liberals are going, oh, they're ruled by fear. They're ruled by fear. It's like, when you get right down to it, I would rather imagine what it would look like to, I'm not married or kids, obviously, but I would rather imagine what it would look like to see my wife raped in front of my eyes and my children murdered by being slammed up against the wall by savages and barbarians. I'd rather imagine that and deal with that unpleasantness now. That would allow me to prepare for and prevent it from happening later. Well, most liberals just don't even want to think about these things and assume that nothing bad is ever going to happen when we know that's just not the case. Bad things do happen, and unless you're prepared for them, they're going to happen. So prepare. Ammo up. So we tend to deal with unpleasant thoughts now as a way to prevent them in the future. What's the worst that can happen if we keep borrowing all this money? Liberals say, everybody gets free stuff. Conservatives say, everybody gets free stuff now, but if we don't stop, what history has happened, because you're not the first people to try to give free stuff to people. What's happened before is everybody gets free stuff until all of a sudden everything collapses, and then we sit around eating rats on spits over burning tires. And frankly, I'd rather deal with the consequences of free stuff now than get there. They don't want to deal with that thought. That doesn't enter their head. They don't want the unpleasantness of it, which is why they do this when you start talking about spending and economic collapse and war and conflict. They don't want conflict. They don't want to face it. They want to push it off and hope it never comes. Sometimes it doesn't, but usually it doesn't come because people like us are preparing ourselves for it. That's what I think. That's what I would say. Don't be a jackass who does bad things to feel good. They don't know they're bad things. They just choose not to look at it. Let's take money from rich people and give it to poor people. Makes me feel good. I'm helping poor people. You're stealing from people who've earned their money, and you are setting up a case of perpetual entitlement and mental slavery for the people who are the victims of this game. And that makes you feel good, but it shouldn't, because neither end of this equation, taking stuff from people who've worked hard for it by force and giving it to people so that they don't ever have to work, which means they don't ever have to have control over their own lives, which means that they're dependent, depressed, inert, sad, terrible, awful existence. You don't get to feel good about either end of this equation. Both ends of those equations, not good. So I'd rather feel bad about doing good than feel good about doing bad. 2 questions left to go on this. Hey, I thought we were going to head into 3-hour territory, but we'll just crack 2 hours. We started moving the mail there for a while. 2 questions left to go on part 3 of the Deep Thoughts edition, which is turning into one of the best shows ever. It's my opinion. I don't know what you think. I think this is a killer show. Bill Thompson wants to know, why is the left 180 degrees out of phase with reality? Everything they say is a lie. Everything they accuse conservatives of is what they are guilty of. Everything good and noble that they claim for themselves are held not by them, but by conservatives. If they believe so strongly in their worldview, why can't they state their position plainly? Beautiful question. Beautiful question. Well, Bill, I think what the definition of the left is today. We're not talking about liberals now. We're not talking about classical liberalism, this idea of freedom, private property. These are all classically liberal idea. We're talking about progressives. And ultimately, I think the reason that the left is 180 degrees out of phase with reality is because it has to be. It's not a coincidence, and it's not just on some issues. Progressivism is a mind control drug for people that can't handle reality. I really think it's that simple. Progressivism is a mental drug that allows people to avoid the consequences of reality. So if people have an acute sense of injustice, they will want to eliminate injustice, and I'm all in favor of eliminating injustice. I really and truly am. But I see justice as an individual issue. What harm was done to that individual and by whom? How do we redress that harm that was done to that individual by whom? How do we make them whole? And so what what they end up with is they end up with a worldview that is predicated on the belief that reality, two things. First of all, that there is no reality. The elimination of reality from the worldview of progressives is the essence of progressivism. And it's not new. When the French Revolution happened, they said, we're going to create a new man. A new man's going to have a new calendar. He's not going to have any more priests. We don't need religion anymore. We don't need aristocracy anymore. We're going to have a decimal calendar and a decimal day and a decimal this and a decimal that. They're going to invent a new person. And this belief that the fundamental structure of reality can be changed by wishing for it, by wanting it enough, is the virus of progressivism. The virus of progressivism is the wish. It's all wishful thinking. It's the wish that people can become virtuous through wanting it enough. And that's just not how people are built. And so every single time we try this, we come face to face with this horrible, horrible, horrible reality. The horrible reality that progressives have to face is, progressives say, if we all just got along, if we all just talked about things and agreed on things, there wouldn't be any war. Well, what they're really saying there is, this is important too. When liberals and progressives say, if we could all just talk about things and work things out, then there wouldn't be any war because there'd be nothing to argue about. The unspoken assumption, this is a relatively recent revelation for me, but if you think about it, it's really true. You want a grenade to throw at leftists, here it comes. When they say, if we could talk about things, then there wouldn't be any more conflict, what they're really saying is, if we could talk about things, we could convince other people of the wisdom of our viewpoint, and then there wouldn't be any conflict. That's what they're saying. Because when they talk about finding common cause with Islam, and that this whole thing is just a result of these conservatives and their little shriveled fear-driven brains, if we could just talk with Al-Qaeda, we'd find out that there's nothing really to disagree about, that we'd get along just fine, that we wouldn't need an army and there wouldn't have to be war and nobody'd have to die and we wouldn't have to bomb kids. What they're really saying is, if we could talk with Al-Qaeda, we could convince them of the wisdom of atheism, the wisdom of sitting around in a hot tub sipping Chardonnay, convince them of the wisdom of letting women be treated like human beings, convince them of the wisdom of allowing homosexuals to live. All these other values that we have, it's built into this worldview that they have, that if we could just convince our enemies and talk with them, we wouldn't disagree about things, there'd be no war. The outcome of that philosophy is never, oh, well, we could eliminate war by not having any disagreements, and the way that we don't have any disagreements is that they get everything they want. In other words, the way not to have any war is to do everything that they want, which means that if you're one of these women arguing against war and saying, if we could just talk about things, everything would be swell, well, there's 1.5 billion people out there whose attitude and response to you is, how dare you sit in the same room as men and have a conversation about important issues? Get back to the kitchen or the bedroom, put that veil over your face, and shut up and don't say another word until you're spoken to. What on earth could a woman possibly have to add to this conversation? That's one way to not have any conflicts, is to start to no longer disagree about this issue. Another way to get over conflicts is to have a conversation with people who think that homosexuals are a sin in the eyes of God and must be executed immediately. So one way we can avoid war is to hang homosexuals the way they want us to, the way they do in Iran and the way they do in some of these other places in Afghanistan. And if you happen to be a woman and you're raped by your uncle, or maybe your uncle and your dad and your older brother at the same time, then you need to be killed, young lady, because you've dishonored the family. Not them, you. We can all agree on these things and we don't have any more war anymore. We'll just do things their way. When you talk to liberals about this idea of, oh, it's all a big misunderstanding, what they're really doing is they're projecting in a way that is so narcissistic, so self-centered, so arrogant, so arrogant. They're basically saying that there's no reason to disagree with Al-Qaeda or the Nazis or the communists or whatever. It's all one big misunderstanding. What they're really saying is they're not real people. They're not real people. They don't have their real desires. They don't have their own religion. They don't have their own culture. They don't have their own value system. They don't have anything. They're just liberals that haven't found the light yet. So what you end up with is You end up with progressives who want to disarm us because they see armament and strength as the source of conflict. And if we just disarmed our side, that would be such a gesture of goodwill. We heard this exact same line of reasoning with the communists in the Cold War. If we would just disarm our side, that would eliminate the fear that's driving them, you see. That's all driven by fear. If we would just disarm our side and do this magnificent, magnanimous gesture and maybe pay some, we got all kinds of reparations to pay because we've been so awful. We freedom-loving people, just been so terrible, making the world rich and safe and healthy and feeding them and everything. We got to make up for that, got to atone for that. So we'll pay them and we'll give them all this other stuff. But then they'll leave us alone because there won't be any misunderstandings. I don't have that kind of arrogance. I don't have the kind of arrogance to say that 1.5 billion people who not only want Sharia but demand Sharia, they're not pretend people to me. They're not progressives who haven't seen the light yet. These are people who are real people, who have a culture that goes back a lot farther than ours. They have a culture and a history that is more important to them than progressivism is to progressives. And if you don't believe that's true, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe that Islam is more important to the jihadis than progressivism is to progressives, then I ask you to put yourself in a position where you have a lot of Harvard professors and Code Pink people on their knees with their hands bound and a person going down the line behind them with a pistol saying, would you rather convert to Islam or would you rather get shot in the head? Every one of them is going to convert to Islam. Every one of them is going to convert to Islam. The only people who would rather get shot in the head than convert to Islam or convert to communism or convert to Nazism or convert to whoever else is controlling you with a gun to your head. The only people that would rather die than that are people who believe as strongly as they do. And that would be Christians or conceivably some Jews. Certainly there's some Jews out there. People who have strong religious beliefs because they believe there are some things more important than that. There are people who think that freedom is more important than that. There are people who think that that the idea of America is more important than that. There are people who feel that that their entire existence is owed to young men, mostly men, some women, who never came home, and that our debt to them is immeasurable and irreplaceable, and we're 40 years old, so we got to be 40 instead of dying at 20 because some guy who was 20 didn't come home, so y'all can kiss my ass, pull the trigger, I'll be goddamned if I'm going to become one of you animals. Those are the kind of people who fight back because they have a belief in something, which is why ultimately we're going to beat these progressives, because we will fight and die for these ideas and they won't. And I've said this before too. Does anybody actually believe? I know people will die for freedom because they're dying every day. As I mentioned in this latest Afterburner, they're not only getting killed overseas in uniform, they're coming home and killing themselves because of what we asked them to do for us. Didn't make them do it, we asked them to do it. They volunteered. So I know people will die for freedom because we send our best people out there to die for freedom every day. And not just our freedom either, other people's freedom. Michael Moore going to die for freedom? Is Michael Moore going to die for progressivism? Is Bill Maher, do you think, ever going to take a rifle and go find himself in a foxhole someplace fighting for progressivism and the right to smoke pot? You see Bill Maher? Do you honestly see a world where Bill Maher has a rifle and is shooting at Al-Qaeda or jihadis or Nazis or anybody for the right to smoke dope and have as many hookers as you want? I don't see that world happening ever. That's why we're going to win. And that's why we're in the fight. That's why they do everything right, we do everything wrong. It's still 50-50 country. Light has power that darkness doesn't. These people don't believe in this. Michael Moore wouldn't die for anything other than the preservation of Michael Moore. Bill Maher would not die for anything other than the preservation of Bill Maher. I think Jon Stewart falls in that category. Not all of them, but most of them. Who's going to die for the right to snort, cocaine off of a hooker's abs? Hey, listen, snorting cocaine off of a hot girl's abs is, there are worse things that you can do that's better than a sharp stick in the eye. But I'm not sure it's worth dying for. And your family is, your kids are, your wife is, your freedom is, because you know what freedom has given you, and if you don't have it, you can imagine what it's like. One of the things I do when I raise money for wounded warriors is I make a very simple, very straightforward argument. When I'm raising money for wounded soldiers, I talk to large rooms of people with lots and lots and lots of money, and they're making a decision based on how much money they want to donate to this particular cause. And I know that most rich people, contrary to what Occupy Wall Street would have you believe, most rich people go to these kind of things at least once a week, more often than not 2-3 times a week. They're giving money all the time to everybody. They're just constantly giving money to people. So the question is, who are they going to give it to and how much are they going to give? And I don't want other people to get the money that should go to wounded warriors. I think I want every penny that those people have. So when I talk to fundraisers, when I talk to rich people, I'll tell you what I say. I say to these wealthy people, I say, look at these men who are here in front of you. These guys don't have arms or legs. This gentleman over here, one of the guys I've met, doesn't have any arms or legs. He's a quadruple amputee. He doesn't have the future that he would have had. His family and his wife don't have the future that they would have had. Not only did he leave his arms and legs overseas, he left that future overseas too. He did all of those things not just so that you could make money and be free, although that was part of it, the fact that you could run a business and make money. He went over there and gave up that for that. And many guys didn't come home so that you could make money. There's nothing wrong with making money. That's an honorable thing to do, as long as you're honest about it. But really, what he did was he left all of those things behind because he didn't want you to spend your day thinking about whether or not your daughter is going to get mortared on the way home from school today. He did those things because he didn't want you to wonder whether your wife is going to go through a sniper alley, a little gap between the buildings, between the Whole Foods, let's say, and the Starbucks, where she could have her head blown off by a guy with a rifle. That's why they went. They fought and died for their buddies, but the reason they signed up was because they wanted to preserve Disneyland for everybody. So, my question to you out there is very, very simple. The question is not what would you pay to protect these things. The question is much simpler than that. The question is, if you lost these things, if these men hadn't made these sacrifices, if they hadn't done their job, and your daughter was under mortar fire every day, and you did lose children or your wife to snipers, or you are a slave of people who make you bow down and take all of your money and all of your riches and all of your house and make you live in a tent and do what they make you do. If they didn't make those sacrifices and you lost all of these things, what would you pay to get them back? What would you give to get them back? If your daughter was killed in a mortar attack getting out of her school, what would you pay to go back to where we are today? You'd pay everything. You'd pay everything you had. You'd give everything you had. Keep that in mind when we're done with the evening tonight, because these people have paid in advance. This is not a contract that we're about to enter into. This is a contract that's already been signed, and one of the parties has already made payment in full. Final question today is from Andy Schnick. He says, even though some wildlife die, oil is not pretty and can be harmful to people. Is the media brainwashing us to think of oil as some sort of extraterrestrial or synthetic substance when it is entirely natural? Here's the amazing thing about oil. If oil didn't exist, let's just say oil didn't exist, let's just say that we had to burn trees for wood, or we had to cut peat, or coal. Even coal is a good example. We had to go and blast these holes in the earth and go in there with pickaxes and pull these rocks out, and then shovel rocks into a furnace. If oil didn't exist, and you were to say to somebody, wouldn't it be cool if there was an energy source that had an energy density far beyond coal and was just packed with these super complex hydrocarbons where just the touch of a spark would release more energy than you know what to do with, where something that's basically the size of a small safe produces 350 horses in harness, in tandem, all the time, right? What would I tell you if there was a substance like this, and the substance was of such high density that you didn't need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gallons of it, that you could go 400 or 500 miles on, 20 gallons or less or something like that? What would you do? What would you do if it turns out it was actually not in solid form or in gaseous form, or it had to be compressed or captured or could leak, or rocks that you had to shovel into a giant bin? You didn't have to carry a coal compartment behind you like a locomotive. What if I told you it was in liquid form, was easily transportable through pipelines, and easily storable in fairly simple things? Then what would you do? And then if I asked you, now what if this miracle substance was so abundant that there doesn't ever seem to be an end of it? You'd think I was an idiot. You wouldn't be able to process it. It would sound like God gave you free energy. I don't know enough about abiotic oil. I know enough to be interested. I'm quite sure the fact that no one's talking about it means that it's probably just a chimera, that it doesn't really exist. But there is a theory that says that oil is not produced by the decay of vegetation and dinosaurs rotting under pressure, but that basically there are so many hydrocarbons observable in the universe, in the nebulae that formed the solar system. There's so many hydrocarbons out there that it's just simply the pressure of a gravitational field and of a heavy planet creates oil, squeezes it out of the core, basically, and there's no end to it. It's literally endless amounts of oil. You think about how small the surface of the Earth is relative to the depth of the Earth. There's just essentially no end to the oil. I've heard stories anecdotally. Again, I'm not trying to sell you on this. I just don't know. But I've heard stories anecdotally where they'll pump an oil field dry and they go back 20 years later just to find out if there's more oil around. It turns out part of it's refilled. But even put that aside, let's say that's not the case. Oil is a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I stand there for how long? I've got a big tank in my new car, because my new car burns a fair amount of gas. It's 17 miles to the gallon. It's like, are you kidding me? Sweet. By the way, I saw one of these photographic macros, which I used to refer to as a meme until I was corrected by the comment section here, and rightfully so. It was basically a picture of a Prius, and below that was a Lamborghini, but for my purposes, I'm going to put a silver Camaro down there. And it's a picture of a Prius, and below that was a sports car. Let's say it's a silver Camaro. And the Prius has a little slogan next to it, a little like a thought balloon, and it says, "I get 48 miles to the gallon, what do you get?" And the sports car says, "I get laid." Something to be said for 17 miles to the gallon or less. With all that said, though, even if oil is a limited resource to the degree that no new oil is being made, what we are finding is that ingenuity is the amount of oil available to human beings today is greater than it was 100 years ago. I think it's far greater. Because while we have in fact burned a fair amount of the oil that was in there, used to just stick a stick in the ground in Pennsylvania, and up from the ground comes a bubbling crude, right? That's gone, and let's say it's gone forever. But once you start to get to volume, the volume of the Earth, that's really what it comes down to. Anybody who's flown over the surface of the Earth knows that the Earth is unbelievably huge. I've done so much flying lately. This is a big, 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 big planet. And when you're at 30,000 feet, which is nothing, when you're 30,000 feet, you see a postage stamp size of the Earth. Even then, at 30, 40,000 feet in a typical commercial flight from LA to New York or whatever, you can't see individual cars on the road. They're too small to make out at cruising altitude. You might see a big truck, but you can't see a car, and you certainly can't see the fuel tank on a car. So the amount of fuel that these things use relative to the size of the Earth, of which you're seeing just a tiny, tiny little bit from 35,000 feet. And you don't see deep either. You're just looking at the surface. There's a lot of this stuff out there. I don't think we'll be on an oil economy forever. I think it'd be nice to transfer to something that's a little different. There are some problems with burning oil, but most of the problems we have with burning oil, we fixed. I mean, this is the thing that drives me crazy about progressives is it's like they're on like the earth is just getting worse and worse and worse. Here in LA, there are 4 or 5 times as many cars on the road in terms of total numbers than there were back in the 1970s, but there is no more smog in LA. I know people are going to say, what do you mean there's no more smog? There's haze, and I live in a town, but I have not seen the kind of skies that I saw when I got here in 1988. I don't ever see that kind of pollution anymore. And I wasn't here early enough to see the real pollution, which was a brown line. I got here in 88, and by the time I got here in 88, the days of your eyes burning from the smog were mostly behind us, almost completely behind us. Nowadays, at least with California emission standards, the air that comes out of my Camaro is probably cleaner than the air that goes into it. I mean, we have, I don't know why we can't give ourselves credit for these miracles that we've done. We've taken this commodity, gasoline, that we just throw away. They used to throw it away. When they were trying to refine kerosene for lamps, for kerosene lamps. They just chuck gasoline away. It was a byproduct. What are we going to do with this useless stuff? I don't know. Just throw it away. Chuck it in the ocean. Civilization is energy. It's that simple. Civilization is energy. And I was having this conversation not long ago, I think, with a soldier. I'm sorry, it wasn't a soldier. It was somebody who spent some time overseas. It was a daughter of a soldier. Spent a fair amount of time in Guam. And Guam is very hot, and South Florida is very hot, and I've been in Thailand, and Thailand is very hot. The Philippines are very hot, and Vietnam is maybe the hottest, most uncomfortable, humid place in the world. And if you've ever lived in a place that was that hot, and South Florida is getting there, and parts of Texas are getting there, but the desert doesn't count because I've been 110 degrees in the desert, been far more comfortable at 110 degrees in the desert than I ever was at 85 degrees in Florida, someplace with humidity. But if you want to imagine that god-awful, sticky, humid hot, you imagine Vietnam on a day in August, let's say at noon, and that heat is pushing you into the ground. That's nature. And then when you walk up to a door, and you open that door, and you walk inside, and it's 68 degrees in there, and it's dark, and you hear that sound, and you smell that smell, that air conditioning's that's America. America is air conditioning. America is air conditioning. Civilization is energy. I was in Thailand a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. Yeah, March of 12. And I was in a town called Pattaya, which is a resort in Thailand. It's about an hour and a half outside of Bangkok. And, boy, you want to talk about, real freedom. I would walk down, they had a place in Pattaya called Walking Street. It's an odd name, but it's actually kind of cool. It was a street that was right on the bay. It was kind of like Riverside Drive kind of thing, right along the side of the bay. And what they decided to do is they blocked it off on both ends permanently for about 2 or 3 miles. So you had to walk down it. And since there were no cars on the road, the cars became kind of a courtyard, the road rather, between establishments on either side of what used to be the road. And so for 3 or 4 miles or so in Pattaya is Walking Street, and it's nothing but bars and nothing but live sex shows and nothing but laundromats and nothing but all of this stuff, right? And I was in Walking Street one Saturday night. I think I saw 1,000 prostitutes in one night. 1,000. Half of them were probably men, ladyboys. Had the time of my life there with my friends from Australia and Royal Marine and friends from Australia and England. It was the Anglosphere live in the streets of Pattaya, and I ate a cricket, which I promised myself I never would do, but I did because I'm not going to let the team down. I'm not going to let America down. If everybody else is eating a cricket or fried grasshopper, then I'm not going to have America just wimp out and be the guys that didn't. No. Took one for the team. Didn't taste bad, actually. It wasn't the taste. It was that if you chew it, all those little bits of chitin get in your teeth, and you can drink 4 bottles of water. I'm telling you, 4. And swish it around. You will not get those little pieces of grasshopper out from between your teeth. But anyway, one of the attractions in Walking Street in Pattaya was something that I think was called the Ice Bar. And what it was it was just a simple semi-trailer, refrigerated semi-trailer, and they cut one end of it off, and they put one end of it was plexiglass. And in that refrigerated car, they had the temperature at sub-0 degrees, slightly below zero. And the whole trick of it, the reason it was a tourist attraction, taking up valuable real estate in Pattaya, was because they had a block of solid ice, and that was the bar, and the walls were solid ice, and the Thai woman behind the bar was wearing a fur parka, and they would serve like flavored shots of ice cold vodka. And so when you went into the ice bar, outside of the bar, you pay your admission. So you pay admission to go in, plus there's the drinks. It wasn't cheap in Thai money, but in American money, it's, 70 cents or something. So outside of the bar, there are on hooks a row of parkas, and you would put the parka on over the shorts and T-shirt that you're normally wearing, so you could go in there and be cold for a while. And we got in there, and as we started to reach for the parkas, this one guy, former Royal Marine and by far the trip MVP by far, he, instead of putting a parka on, he just peeled his shirt off and just went in there shirtless. So we all did. So we all went in there completely naked from the waist up with this transparent window, and it's 30 degrees in there, and you can see your breath. But I mean, you can, this is not like cold, and it's not cold for a long time. We're in there maybe 15, 20 minutes. So here are these crazy white people from Australia and United Kingdom, and one from Canada. It was the whole blogosphere, and this American guy. And we're pretty well lubricated before we go in there, and we're drinking these delicious little shots of like cherry vodka, knocking them back, and having ourselves a party. And you could see your breath, and there was some person dressed up as a polar bear in a polar bear suit in there. And we were just having the time of our lives, not thinking much about it. And we turned around and we looked out through this plexiglass window, and there were like 7,000 people staring at us, just staring at us. And that made it even better, of course. But what we realized was there were 7,000 people out there who most of whom had never ever been colder than 75, 80 degrees, ever. And they couldn't believe the fact that somebody would be in an environment that cold and they'd be in there without shirts on, that they'd be having fun, that it'd be kind of a goof. And that's when I realized civilization is energy. There's an electrical system in Pattaya, and they're running the refrigerator, and they're making a profit off of the fuel they're burning, because I had the time of my life, and so did everybody else. But if you've ever lived overseas, and I see a couple people in the comment section, some people in Guam, Marianas, Philippines, a lot of our servicemen know this better than I do. But I'll just go on the record as a civilian and as a person who's talked to a lot of soldiers. When you walk into a well air-conditioned building in Guantanamo Bay is a great example. I've been there twice. So I've been to Gitmo. You walk into an air-conditioned building, and you close that door behind you, and it doesn't matter where you are. Inside is America. It's America. Because it's comfortable. And the weenies of the world go, well, how much energy are you burning in order to be comfortable? My answer is, how much have you got? Can I be more comfortable if I buy more energy? Because I am paying for it, If I buy more energy, can I have more fun than this? Because I don't believe that the energy is limited. I don't believe that the earth is dying. I don't believe any of this stuff. I think the earth used to be dying. I remember seeing the earth dying when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s. The Ohio River caught fire. My senior year and graduated in 1977, and the Ohio River, I think it was in Cleveland because Kucinich was the boy mayor at 23 or something. The Ohio River caught fire. And you would sit in traffic, and the cars in front of you little blue puffs of smoke would come out of the exhaust. And when jets would take off from the airport, the departure side of an airport looked like somebody had taken a number 2 pencil and smudged like black smoke. Black smoke. And when I was a kid, they were dumping mercury into the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes were gigantic, sterile pools of industrial waste. And when I was a kid, when you went to McDonald's and you had a bag of food, when you were finished with the bag, you threw it out the window. And the freeways were lined with garbage. And it's not like that anymore, because for a while there, as I talk about in the regulations thing on the virtual presidency, which you can see all of right now by becoming a member at BillWhittle.com, many regulations are good. And the EPA in its early days did actual good. Now the EPA's job to make sure that nobody makes any money. That's their job, is to make sure nobody gets started in a business. That's what the EPA is here for. Because they've reached asymptotic effect, right? As they get more and more effective, there's less and less to do. And as there's less and less to do, they have to go more and more energy, more and more activism to get a slightly greater increase. So if you want to launch a rocket and you want to get it to 70% reliability, that's a certain amount of work. 80% reliability is a lot more work. Getting from 90 to 95% reliability, certainly getting from 90% to 99% is as much energy as it is to get, as much work as it is to get from 0 to 90. It's asymptotic. It slows down. And that's where we are today. So oil is a godsend. Oil is a wonder. And let's not even talk about plastics. The best reason not to burn any more oil is because we need oil for plastics. And George Carlin, who I disagreed with on so many things, I thought was a very sad, unhappy, miserable guy, basically said to these people who's saying, I'm doing this for the earth, I'm doing this for the earth. He's like, George Carlin said, what do you mean you're doing it for the earth? Maybe the whole reason humans are here is because the earth wants plastics. Who knows? You don't know. Nobody knows. Maybe the earth just wanted plastics, so here we are. So this is my attitude, right? It's not like I don't care about the environment. Of course I care about the environment. I happen to live in the environment. The environment's got cleaner and cleaner and cleaner since I was a kid. And it stopped getting clean probably around the 90s. Since then, it's gotten not much cleaner. But the regulations have gone up. Oil and cars are burning much cleaner than they used to. Plastics, which we used to just throw away, are now put into landfills, which are models of landscaping. These things, they have these plastic liners, and when they're finished, they look like parks. They're far, far, far better than they were before they put the garbage in the hole. And can't we leave something to future archaeologists? Is this such a real problem, honestly, that we cart the stuff out and dig a hole and put it in the ground, and then 50,000 years from now or 500 million years from now, the ant archaeologists with their little spades and their 8 arms or 6 arms or whatever, maybe they're arachnid archaeologists with 8 arms, and they dig out and this thing here. Human beings existed, I can tell, because I've got a Nestle's Double Quick bottle. We think they used this as a form of worship. Who knows? Anyway, God bless oil. And if we didn't have it, we'd never be able to imagine it. So let's be smart about it. Let's get it out there. And the smarter we get and the more expensive oil becomes. The reason that so many of these oil technologies are working now is because none of this stuff made sense when oil was 60 cents a gallon. But when oil's $4 a gallon, it suddenly becomes economically feasible to go get oil where it's more difficult to get oil. But we find more and more and more, and compressed natural gas and fracking, which is just it's not human ingenuity, it's American ingenuity. It's American ingenuity and risk-taking. Turns out there's more natural gas available than we know what to do with. It's just, I don't know. It's so funny to me. We talk about this all the time. We advance technologically and we regress morally to the point where when it's all said and done, we will be intellectual and moral imbeciles with godlike technologies at our fingertips. And we're heading there real quick. And that's 2 minutes and 28 seconds, which gives me about a minute and a half or a minute 20 to do a close, which gets us to 2.5 hour show right on the nose. That was so much fun. That actually was a real blast. Time flies when you're having fun. We'll do something different next time. A lot of people have been saying maybe a video games show. That'd be fun. It'd be fun to talk about video games. But this was an absolute adventure. This was just, I don't know, this is one of the best shows I've ever felt like we've ever done. Because we do them together. The questions come from you. The feedback in the comment sections come from you. It's all part of a big feedback loop that we share. And as I said at the beginning of the show, if you're one of these people that have only ever watched it on YouTube or after hours, you could be one of the 170 that are watching right this time. And we'll see if we can make it a little more regular and try and put a stake in it, not have it be either Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, depending on how busy I am. gotten a lot less busy lately, got a lot more free brain cycles, and things are going to start looking a lot better in the future. We'll talk about that next time, too. Until then, as always, thank you, as we said earlier, for my statistically impossible life. Just utterly statistically, the chance of this being born into this life is so close to zero, it might as well be zero. But as many of you pointed out, I didn't get born into this chair. I got born into America, and getting into this chair was a result of a lot of hard work over a long period of time. And I'm sure the same is for all of you out there, too. Incredible fun tonight. Thanks for joining us. This is episode 65, part 3 of the Big Deep Ideas, part 3 and final part. Thanks again for joining us. I'm going to hit the fade out button now, and then I'll be sure to hit the record button and the save button, because get this one up online. It's always a pleasure seeing you guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.